Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Yep, porque se hear you. Huh? Yep, I think you're doing that one. Probably. Yeah. I'm here. Be right. I'm back. Yeah.
A few weeks ago,
No.
I had to travel from the
No, I don't hear
outskirts of
nothing.
my city into the downtown for a job interview. The process took all night long, and the employers kept asking for more and more paperwork. I had just moved, and not all of my documents had arrived in or been renewed yet. Eventually, it got to the point where I couldn't even proceed in the hiring process without more documentation, and I had to leave the office blocks and go back home in the middle of the night. Understandably, I was a bit annoyed, and the situation wasn't helped when I got to the subway station and saw that one of the tracks was under maintenance. The train was delayed and it would be coming in late. Irritated, I sat down on a concrete bench and started idly looking through my phone, as one often does when bored. The station that I was stuck in was not one of the nicer stations in the city. It was located directly on the onset of the inner city, and because of its fairly inconvenient location, it was almost always empty. Tonight was no exception, and I was the only person in the entire underground. About a minute into my waiting, I heard footsteps coming from the other end of the station. As they drew closer, I heard muffled conversation and eventually saw an old First Nations man shuffling down the stairway from the above-ground station. He was speaking on the phone. I'm not sure if he was homeless, but he looked rough around the edges and had clearly seen his fair share of the streets. Not wanting to stare, I returned my gaze to my phone, but kept a conscious ear out for the man. As unpleasant as being alone in the night is, it is far worse to be alone with a single stranger. As I listened to the man's conversation, I began to realize something. He wasn't speaking English, rather his conversation was in Cree, one of the local indigenous languages. I study linguistics, and I naturally found it fascinating to hear Aboriginal languages being spoken conversationally, on account of it being an extremely rare thing to hear outside of reservations. So, not looking up from my phone, I turned my hearing into this conversation ever so slightly more. Although my knowledge of Cree is minimal, I nonetheless immediately noticed several bizarre characteristics of this man's speech. It's difficult to explain exactly, but it sounded as if he was constantly changing his tone of voice and emotion. One second, it sounded as if he was speaking to an old friend, and the next he would switch tones completely, sounding grave and serious, as if he was speaking to his boss or a figure of authority. It was a subtle enough change that I didn't initially notice it until I started listening in, but once I did notice it, it was impossible to ignore it. I've never heard anybody speak like he was, let alone without once changing the volume of his voice. I checked the station clock, 4 minutes until the train arrived. The man's conversation seemed to be slowing down, and his replies became shorter and gruffer, down to the point to where they just became one-word utterances, as if he were confirming a list. He paused for a
I'm here.
moment, and then clear as day said something he had no right to say.
Huh?
Well, he said my last name. As a note, I have an extremely uncommon and
No, I'm
difficult to
still here.
pronounce surname. I've since looked at several independent national census reports, and they all seem to indicate that there's only about a dozen people in the entire country with my
Sure wanna?
surname. And at that, they're all located on the opposite side of the country, over 3,000 kilometers away. I am the only person with my surname across this entire range.
At the
I
moment,
should
right?
emphasize as well how perfectly he pronounced it. I can count the number of times that somebody has correctly pronounced my name the first time on one hand, but this guy nailed it, even down the aspirations. I know that what he said wasn't a word in Cree either, as I've since spoken to one of my linguistics professors, and he's told me that my surname is a phonological impossibility in Cree or any other Algonquin language. I was absolutely bewildered when I heard the man say it. There was absolutely nothing on my person that had my surname printed on it. All of my documentation was in my breast pocket under 2 layers of clothing. I didn't know how to react. It felt as if my entire reality had started to spin in circles. I fought against my urges to look at the man. I almost felt as if I looked at him, this whole situation would become real. His conversation continued without missing a beat. A few minutes later, the train arrived. I got on immediately and sat in a carriage across from a transit security officer. As the train pulled out of the station, I glanced through the adjacent window at the man, still standing in the underground. He looked up at me for the briefest moment before going back to his phone call. On the ride back, I had almost calmed my heartbeat before I realized something. The train that I was riding was the only train that was going to that station that night. The other track was under maintenance, and nothing would have come on it at all that night. If he wanted to catch a train, there was literally no other option than to catch the train I was riding, which he very deliberately didn't do. Then I realized something else. I had seen the man enter into the underground through the staircase from the above-ground shelter. Not only was the above-ground shelter warmer or more spacious than the underground, but it had another advantage as well: cell service. If he wanted to make a phone call, why did he leave the warm quality reception of the above ground to make his call in the cold dark underground if he didn't have the intention of catching a train? And why did his phone call contain a name that belonged to only one person in 3,000 kilometers? I know this story isn't as creepy as most, and it's not your typical
Man.
Amazon meat, but it really creeps me out, and I guess I'll never know why he said my name. The story happened about 2 weeks ago. My name is Amanda, and I'm 16 years old. I was at a bus stop after spending the day at my friend's house, waiting to go home. I was sitting down scrolling through Instagram on my phone as I waited. I looked up now and then to check to see if I could see my bus coming and to see if anyone else was around the bus stop. The one time I looked up, I noticed a man across the street looking in my direction. He was staring at me, but I didn't think much of it at that moment and carried on looking at my phone. After about 2 minutes, I looked up again to see the man still standing there, still staring at me. I was thinking this is weird, but I tried not to pay attention to him and hoped the bus would turn up soon. After about 3 minutes of nervously looking through my phone, trying to ignore the strange man, I glanced up a third time to see that he wasn't there,
Cleaning a window.
and I let out a small sigh of relief.
Oh, you cleaning windows.
And someone tapped my shoulder. It startled me, and I turned around to see that it was the creepy guy that had been watching me. He spoke and then said, "Hey, do you got a light?" with a bent cigarette in his mouth, also grinning with his yellow teeth. I said in a nervous reply, "No, I don't smoke." His reply back was,
Okay then.
"I bet you don't," and let out a quiet chuckle.
Nope.
I didn't know what to think of that, but he was making me uncomfortable now, and even more than he was before. He stood by me at the bus stop and proceeded to light a cigarette with a match. I thought, why did he ask me for a light if he had matches the whole time? Was it just some excuse to talk to me? About a minute passed by until he spoke again. Whilst smoking, he then said, "You know, it's been a long time since I had some good tail." He took another puff of his cigarette and then said, "Yep, you'll do just fine." He threw his cigarette on the ground and turned towards me. My heart was beating out of my chest and I was breathing heavily, going into flight or fight mode. When my bus lights pulled up around the corner down the street, the man saw the lights and then ran off. I waved the bus down in a panic. I was so scared for what could have happened to me. Thank God my bus turned up when it did. Me and my wife Claire were on our way to Rotterdam for the weekend to visit her family, as it was her father's birthday. We live in Brussels, so the drive there would take around just over 2 hours or so, but we left at about 9:30 p.m. because I get home from work around 9, and my boss wouldn't let me finish earlier, which means we would get to Claire's parents' house later in the day than we would have liked. But her parents usually stay up late, and as it was her father's birthday weekend, they probably would be awake celebrating, and it wouldn't be a problem. About an hour into the drive, we decided to stop at a gas station to refuel the car and get some coffee. It was dark, cold, and pouring with rain, so we didn't want to take too long. Claire went inside to get some coffee, snacks, and use the bathroom and pay for the gas. As I was putting the gas into the car, I noticed a strange-looking man in the short distance. He was staring very intensely at my wife as she walked into the gas station, but what bothered me more was how odd and how out of place he looked. He had no car or people with him from what I could see. He had long stringy hair, bad trimmed scruffy beard, and he was only wearing blue jeans, a white tank top, and trainers on. I thought it was crazy as it was January and freezing cold with the pouring rain. Why was he here at a gas station at this time far from anywhere, and barely clothed for the current weather? At the time I was thinking this guy must have been out of his mind. I tried to ignore him and look elsewhere, as I wanted to avoid drawing attention to myself from this strange man as much as I could. But not long after, I decided to look back to check if he was still there, because I was very much distracted and unsettled by him, and couldn't look away for long. But when I looked back, he was gone. I was very relieved, as I didn't want him staring at my wife Claire when she came back. Just as I was thinking that, I heard a psst behind me. It was him. The creepy guy that was staring at Claire was now staring at me and smiling. He looked so much worse up close, so tired like he hadn't slept in years. He had horrible crooked yellow teeth and scars across his neck. His jeans were ripped and muddled, and his trainers had holes in them. I just froze. I was startled and was thrown off by a sudden appearance behind me, and then after an awkward moment of intense silence, he then spoke. He said in his gruff voice, "Your wife." Then he leaned closer and he smiled awful like he hadn't bathed in months. He then said, "I want to take a bite out of your wife. Not just a bite though, a nice juicy bite." And then he grinned a smile from ear to ear, showing his vile teeth once more. At this point I was ready to have a physical confrontation, but after that he turned around and walked away laughing and talking to himself. I quickly finished putting gas in the car and jogged into the gas station and made sure Claire was safe. I then walked her back to the car. As I entered the station, she was just finishing paying for gas and the snacks. She turned to me and said, "Hey, what's the matter? You look like you've seen a ghost. Are you okay?" I told her about the creep outside, but I'll tell you about it when we're back on the road. Let's just go. We got back to the car and started to pull out of the station and make our way back on the motorway. Just as we're leaving, I looked in the rearview mirror to see that the creepy guy is standing in the road in the rain, just watching us and laughing. I told Claire about the man and the encounter that I had with him. She was just as freaked out as I was and was glad I came inside the station and made sure she got to the car okay. About a week later, I saw on the news that a woman had been assaulted near a gas station. A man attempted to grab her and assumed to kill her. Luckily, she escaped from him, but through the struggle, the man had bitten her very hard on the back of the neck, and the woman reported as she escaped from his grip and ran away. The man then screamed, saying, "All I want is a juicy bite. Just one more bite." Just before bursting into a mad laughter. I was stunned, and I instantly knew the man who attacked that woman, and the incident took place at the same gas station. I told Claire and informed the authorities shortly after. From what I know, to this day, that insane man was never apprehended. Be careful with strange men around gas stations. You never know what could happen. This story happened 2 months ago and takes place in the Netherlands. My name is Kim. I'm a 24-year-old waitress and I just finished my shift at the restaurant that I work at. I live in a small apartment complex. After a long, stressful week, I just wanted to have a relaxing Friday night. I took a bath, played some Black Ops 4, and then around 7:30 p.m. I decided to order a pizza. So I rang Domino's and I heard the phone answer, but there was a slight pause before I heard someone speak. I could just make out some muffled breathing. I said, hello? Then right after I spoke, a man then said, "Domino's Pizza, can I take your order?" Which I thought was strange because why didn't he say that when he picked up the phone? But I brushed it off. I ordered a large pepperoni and sausage pizza with stuffed crust, some garlic bread, and a big bottle of Pepsi, which he replied, "For pickup or delivery?" I said delivery and gave him my address, and he told me it would take around 30 to 40 minutes to arrive. I then told him thank you, and he replied with, "The pleasure is mine." Then he hung up abruptly. I was just thinking to myself, what a strange thing to say, and kind of laughed it off, thinking maybe he was just joking or something, but still, it weirded me out. About 35 minutes passed until I heard a slow knock on my door. 4 knocks to be exact, with about 2 seconds in between each knock. I opened the door to see a large bald man holding my pizza. He then said, "Hello, young lady," and handed me the pizza and said, "That will be 22 euros and 40 cents, which I thought was a very weird thing to say, as that's something you usually say to a child. I took the pizza and gave him the money. As I handed him the cash, he kind of grabbed the money where he could also touch my hand and slide his fingers on the palm of my hand, which really creeped me out. As I looked up, he had a big smile on his face and his eyes were bulging. I awkwardly smiled and said to keep the change, and then shut the door. I sat down, turned on the TV, and started to eat my pizza. About 2 minutes go by since I got my pizza, and then I heard a slow knock on my door. Same as before, 4 knocks with 2 seconds in between each knock. I thought to myself, it can't be the pizza guy again, could it? What could he want? I was really creeped out and I didn't want to deal with him again. I checked through the peephole and to my surprise, there was no one there. I opened my door and said, hello? Anybody there? I looked left and right down the dingy lit corridor and didn't see anything. This is weird, I thought. Just as I was about to close the door, I looked down to see a bottle of Pepsi and garlic bread. It was from my order. I forgot to take it in with me in the house because I wanted to end my encounter with that freaky bald man as quickly as I could. I carried on eating and watching TV. After I finished my pizza, I got up to throw the cardboard away and take out the trash. I went out my apartment and headed downstairs outside to the big rubbish bin. I glanced across the car park and I noticed the car was parked and there was someone in there just staring at me. I couldn't make out who it was because it was too dark. I entered my apartment again and carried on playing my PlayStation. After a few hours or so, I got tired of playing and decided to go to bed and read my book before getting some sleep. About 15 minutes into reading, I heard a knock on my door. A slow knock. Now I was scared I knew who this was.
What am I doing?
I didn't get up out of bed. I just tried to ignore it and see if he would go away.
Watching YouTube.
He didn't. The knocking continued. I plucked up the courage and got up to look through
On my other phone.
The man was staring right through glass, smiling like he did earlier, but this time with a menacing look on his face and bloodshot eyes. When I saw this, I jumped back and gasped out of fear and shock. He must have heard me because as soon as I made a noise, his knocking turned into pounding, and he started screaming. He was turning my doorknob, trying to break in. I ran to my phone and called the police. The banging stopped shortly after. I thought he might have left because maybe he heard me call the police. I checked the peephole once again, and he wasn't gone. He was standing there, not smiling this time, just staring at the glass hole with a blank expression, muttering to himself. The police finally arrived and arrested him. I don't know what happened to that man that night, or why he was doing what he did. I just pray to God that I'll never see him again, and I'll think twice when ordering a pizza. This story happened when I was 5 years old and takes place in the UK. I'm a male and my name is George. My nan had started to say that her house was haunted and tell my mom that she would hear things in the house. My granddad had passed away a few months before this, and as my mom didn't really believe in ghosts or things like that, she thought my nan was lonely since her husband had passed away, so she wouldn't take much notice to what my nan was telling her. Every now and then, my mom, who was a single mother at the time, would have to go away for a few days at a time because of her job. So I would just stay over at a friend's house or my cousin's, but my nan was having some trouble, and we guessed she was feeling lonely, but my mom decided that I would stay with her for the few days that my mom would be away. We get to the house and say goodbye to my mom. Later that day, my nan was cooking dinner, and I was sat in the front room watching some cartoons and playing with action figures. I then heard footsteps coming from the room above me, which was my nan's bedroom. The floor was creaking. I just thought that my nan had maybe gone upstairs for something. I then got up to go get a Coke from the fridge. I walked in the kitchen and I was completely startled when I saw my nan cooking in the kitchen. I thought she was upstairs. She looked at me and said, "You okay, sweetie? Dinner will be ready soon." I was confused but just shrugged it off and said okay, got my drink, and carried on watching cartoons, thinking maybe it was just the wind or the house making noise or something. Some time passed after eating dinner. It was soon time for me to get ready for bed, so I headed upstairs to brush my teeth and put my PJs on. As I walked past my nan's bedroom after getting ready to head back downstairs, I heard a sort of bang coming from inside. I stopped and turned to face the slightly ajar door, and I saw that the room was dark. Nan was definitely not in there. She was downstairs, so I wondered what could have made the noise. I nervously opened the door very slowly and looked inside the dark room. From what I could make out from the hallway light shining through it, it was empty and nobody was in there. I switched on the light and walked in to check the room. I saw that a picture frame had fallen on the floor from her vanity, and I walked over to pick it up, and the more I entered the room, I felt the cold type of cold that you don't feel often. The type of cold where it feels like there's a presence with you. I got to the picture frame and picked it up. It was my granddad. I looked at it for a moment, thinking how much I miss him. I then placed the picture back on the vanity, and just as I did that, something happened. Something that I'll never forget. I turned towards her walk-in cupboard that was next to her vanity, and the door started slowly opening. I froze in complete fear, and my eyes were wide open. I watched as the door was slowly opening, and a hand appeared around the door. I started breathing heavily, and then following the hand was a face appearing around the door. A pale white face with blue eyes, cold as ice, looking straight through me. I screamed and started crying, running out of the room and downstairs, straight into my nan's arms. I couldn't get my words out as I was so scared and upset. I eventually calmed down and explained to my nan what I saw. She held me and just looked up at the ceiling. She told me it's okay and that she's here now. We slept downstairs in the front room that night. As you can imagine, I didn't get much sleep. I just laid there cuddling with my nan on the sofa bed, just staring up at the ceiling, hearing the upstairs floor creak all night long. It's like my nan knew what I saw because she was looking up with me. The next day, my mom came to pick me up. Her work trip had finished a day earlier, so I got up to go home and I didn't have to stay at my nan's house another night. Looking back now, I wish I had stayed with my nan. She must have been terrified being there all on her own, but I was too young and afraid to think like that. Right before we left, my nan had told me something. She told me that everything will be okay and she loves me. That was the last time I saw her and spoke to her. She died 3 weeks later. I never told anyone about what I experienced until today. I'm 23 now, and looking back, I think my nan knew what was going to happen to her. I truly believe that whatever that thing was in that house is responsible for her passing. I just pray to God it wasn't. To preface this story, I want to give some context. I didn't have a car for most of the time I was in high school, not getting one until my senior year. That left me either having to walk where I wanted to go, get someone to drive me, or just not go where I want to at all. This left me homebound during a lot of my free time, since a lot of the time my siblings didn't want to give me a ride to places I could go and chill. Though the neighborhood that I lived in itself was considered affluent, it was located in the south part of town and was and still is pretty seedy. This included the closest gas station to my house, which when walking to it was about an hour away. I did and still do have a large appetite, so whenever I had some extra cash, I would always walk there at night to grab some snacks. Admittedly, walking there in the dead of night wasn't a good idea, especially with the type of people who hung out around the area, but I felt like it was my only option. I'm rather overweight, and I have been all my life, which led to my father being very controlling of my diet, and he would always be passive-aggressively judgmental of whatever I ate. This led me into a mentality of hiding my eating habits, including getting food late at night to eat, and including walking to that gas station. This was another one of those nights, and I was about a quarter of the way there. Being the nervous and paranoid person I am, I had been checking over my shoulder and keeping my eyes peeled on my general area because the last thing I wanted to happen was get jumped at the dead of night. At this point in my walk, I was nearing the homeless shelter that was on the route to the gas station. On the side of the building facing the road, there's a garbage retainer walled off with a wooden fence. You can smell it right before you see it, and on the hot southern summer night, I could smell it hard. I increased my speed out of instinct to get out of the building's vicinity because of that, before my eyes caught him. There was a guy leaning against the fence that walled off the garbage retainer. It took a bit more of staring as I walked by to realize what he was doing. He was jacking off, fully blown in view of anyone walking past. Though it freaked me out, I can't say I was surprised. A lot of drug addicts and mentally ill people who couldn't afford proper help congregated this area, and I had figured that this guy was just another one of those people. Either way, I increased my already quick pace to get out of the area. I wish that was the end of this, but unfortunately it wasn't. The guy still going at it down there managed to get up and began following me. I was on the verge of tears at this point, scared that he was going to catch up to me and do God knows what to me. I increased how fast I was going even more, fully prepared to run at the drop of the hat if the guy did, though I knew in the back of my mind if he really wanted to, he could probably catch up to me pretty easily, due to how unathletic I was. But he kept his distance, continuing to follow me until I finally managed to reach the gas station. The amount of joy and relief that I felt at seeing it, I can't manage to properly describe. I dashed in there and alerted the attendant to what was going on, asking if I could linger in there for a bit. She was more than happy to oblige and asked if I wanted to call the police, but stupidly, I said no. I didn't want my dad finding out what I had been doing, and honestly, at that point I just wanted to get back to the safety of my house and not deal with the cops. After waiting around for a bit, I checked outside and didn't see the guy who had followed me. I decided that it was as good of time as ever, so I went back inside, got what I came for, and called a friend to have on the phone with me as I walked back home. Thankfully, the guy who had followed me was nowhere to be found on my way back, and I got back to my place in one piece. This didn't end my night crawls, but I didn't leave to go to the gas station for a while, and definitely not without letting a friend know where I was going. This experience isn't of mine, but of my mother. She's been a truck driver for 26 years. Yes, a very long time. She is the only female driver at her company. Being a female driver, she's experienced a lot of odd and very weird things on the road and truck stops that she's been on. She has always told me that she feels unsafe at a truck stop, and she would not get out of her cab, meaning she would not even try to take a bathroom break at a truck stop. While my mom was driving down the road in Mason City, Iowa late at night with a load on a four-way road, there was a dark Ford truck driving beside her. He sped up a little and she noticed there was a blue tarp over the back and the back hatch was down. He had hit a bump somewhere in the road, and to her surprise, she saw what looked like an arm flop out from under the tarp and was dangling there. The person must have noticed this and pulled over to an empty parking lot. My mother stopped at the stop sign staring. She hurried and dialed 911. The man had noticed that she had seen this as he looked her in the eyes and flopped the arm back under the tarp and put the back hatch up. The man wasn't too tall. He had dark hair, light skin, and dark clothes. My mother told the police the color of the truck and license plate number and location. She thanked he noticed her because he started to follow her truck. As she was telling me this story, in the back of my mind, I was thinking she could have just run him over if she needed to. My mother said that she had a very bad gut feeling about him following her, and she kept driving through the town. She locked her doors in case she needed to stop somewhere. The guy's truck suddenly disappeared by turning into a different road. She sighed in relief. When my mother got home the next day, which was on a Friday, I was in my high school years, and she was telling her girlfriend at the time the story. But the news came up and reported that a news lady had vanished and never came to work. My mother felt very cold and was thinking that she might have seen her body, or at least part of it, and her killer. But unfortunately, the police never called back about the driver. They never found the lady's body either. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. And if you have your own personal scary story, be sure to submit that to my subreddit at reddit.com/r/southerncannibal or to my email at southerncannibal@gmail.com. I'm always looking for new stories. And before we bring this video to a close, I just want to shout out all of my $5 or more patrons, as well as my $3 or more patrons featured on screen. Shout out to Babe Lincoln, Beth A, Kate E, Celeste S, Ellie S, Emily W, Heather B, Howard R, Jacqueline W, Jazzy G, Jonathan C, Lori J, Matthew B, Michael G, Random Randy, Steph L, Tammy S, and Terry H. Thank all of you so much for supporting me on Patreon. I really appreciate it more than you know. And if any of you would like to join these awesome people and also become a patron, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/southerncannibal. Thank you everyone, and have a good one. And remember to always
I said, ooh.
stay hungry.
Yep. Yeah.
Hey everyone, before we begin on this video, I just want to apologize for putting up another compilation so soon, as I know I just did 2 a few weeks ago, and I know some of you aren't fans of these. The only reason I even posted this is because I was in the hospital all day today, again for my back pain. I promise I'll get back to new stories starting tomorrow, but since I'm in a lot of pain and since I was in the hospital, I wasn't really able to do much today. And before someone comments and tells me to stop talking at the beginning of my videos, I'm literally only doing this for my fans who actually want to know what's going on with me. And again, to explain why I did another compilation. So to all my real fans out there who actually care about me and not just the stories, thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to this. And thank you guys so much for all of the support lately. I really appreciate it so much. All that being said, I still hope you guys enjoy this compilation. Now, let's begin on the stories. And remember to always stay hungry. When I was 8, my family decided to take a summer vacation and take us to a big famous water park for a couple of hours away from home. My older sister, who was 11 at the time, and my little sister, who was 5, as well as my uncle, who was paraplegic, and his girlfriend. We get to the water park, and my uncle and his girlfriend end up staying at the cabanas at the very entrance of the water park, due to the fact that it was the only place with shade and he had no intentions of getting in the water with his wheelchair. So they let us go off on our own all day. Big mistake. Since there were only either single or double person tubes, my older sister decided to get on one with my younger sister and let me get on one alone but just hold on to theirs. And that worked for a little while, but we got on the lazy river that went around the whole park, and at the end of the river they made it like very fast and crazy, with all of the waves crashing into you and stuff. I ended up letting go of their tube and flipping out on mine. By the time I even realized it, I had lost them. I thought it was no big deal and I'd find them soon enough again. So I'm trying to get back on my tube and for some odd reason I just can't do it. A man notices me struggling and decides to come help me. I finally get in and I thank him and try to float away, but he doesn't let go of my tube. Instead, he starts talking with me and then asking why I'm all alone. I explain that I lost my sisters, and he then suggests that he get on the tube with me because he doesn't want me to get lost or drown. I say okay, and we get on the tube together. He starts forcing me to ride all of the slides with him and talks to me about how his hotel room isn't that far away and he has a whole bunch of toys that I would love to play with. I actually started getting interested because I didn't have that many toys of my own, and the ones that I do have are broken from my sisters. He says that we can get on one last ride and then head over afterwards. I agree. While waiting in line, he starts acting really giddy and weird. He kept swimming under our tube and would play with my feet and legs and would tell me they were pretty. There happened to be a young couple that was behind us who was watching all of this unfold. I guess they could see the discomfort in my face because they tapped me on my shoulder to ask me if I was okay and if I even knew this man. He tried answering for me, but they cut him off and they said they were talking to me. I reassured them that I was totally okay, but after seeing the look on their face, that made something click in my head. I then started to realize that what was going on with this man wasn't okay. Once we got off the slide, I told him that I had to go, and once we got to the opening of the river, I just wanted to get on a single tube by myself because I needed to find my sisters. He tells me that I can't do that, and he needs to watch me, so I can't leave him. For some odd reason, the moment he said that, I had this fear completely wash over me. I ducked out of the tube and just started swimming. When I turned to look back, he was right behind me, swimming after me. I ended up swimming to the entrance of the river and got on a single tube, which he then ended up grabbing and flipping me out of it, saying I needed to get on a double tube with him. I did not feel safe anymore. I ended up running out and running to my uncle and his girlfriend. I didn't tell them what happened, just that I got tired of being in the water. After sitting there for a while, I saw no signs of the man. Thankfully, my sisters made it back to the cabana safe and sound as well, and eventually we all left. Around 10 years ago, when I was 11 years old, I went on a summer vacation somewhere in northern Africa with my parents and my 3 younger siblings. One late afternoon, we were playing in front of our hotel, enjoying the peace and quiets of the otherwise heavily crowded beach. Only a few other locals and some tourists here, and they were still bathing in the sun and enjoying the view. From the ground floor of the hotel, you couldn't really see where the beach met the ocean. A sand dune from which you had to descend from blocked the view. The beach was fairly wide, a little less than 300 feet, and skirting along the ocean far into my peripheral vision. Seeing my parents relax in their chairs, I asked them if we could walk up to the ocean to dip our feet in the water. I assured my mom, who was at the time a classic helicopter parent, that we'd come right back, and that I wouldn't let go of my twin siblings' hands. "Only the feet. We'll be back in 5. I remember saying. In a good mood and seemingly not too worried, she let us go. She trusted me, as she knew the stranger danger alert was well drilled into my mind since I was able to walk. Although I think it also helped that we were on a private beach with other tourists still around. When we almost reached the water, I then turned around to see that my parents had totally disappeared from my line of sight. The twins and my sister were already running towards the ocean. "Last one in loses," they screamed right before I caught up with them, almost bumping into a couple walking away from us. Apart from them and a few people to our right docking a small fishing boat, no one was within earshot. After playing around for a couple of minutes and getting a little more than just our feet wet, I told them we should head back, as I knew our mom was probably getting worried. Just as I took one of the twins' hand to hold, I see a man in his late 30s approaching us out of the corner of my eye. He's fully clothed, wearing a jumper and long jeans. A bit dirty looking. Definitely not a beach outfit, I remember thinking. He's watching my younger sister attentively, smiling at her while holding his hand open. I didn't see him walk towards us, but I knew he came from the direction of where the boat was, which was around 50 feet away from us. 2 other similar-looking men who were still at the boat started to walk towards us as well. As the first man was now standing in front of us, I saw that he was holding some small pieces of round pink candy. I don't remember much of what he said to us, but he spoke some broken French, saying something about how pretty we all looked and how beautiful our eyes were. He told my little sister to take the candy, and then smiling, getting so close to her, he almost put it in her mouth himself until I yanked her towards me. I politely told it, "No thank you," while searching for the other two behind me. "Never accept candy from strangers" is what I instantly heard my mom saying in my head. Don't talk to strangers, never get into their car, and never accept candy from them. I started to get scared as I never thought I'd be in a scenario where a strange man would actually offer us some weird-looking candy. Of course, while all this is going on in my head, the man is still telling my sister who's getting scared how beautiful she is, while the other two men are coming up behind him and blocking our way. Our backs are turned towards the ocean. All three of them are trying to engage with us now, asking us where our parents were and if we were sure we didn't want any candy, all the while talking to each other in their own language and sometimes appearing to look around. I remember one of them putting his hand on my other sister's shoulder. I wanted to scream. I started to look around to see if there were any other adults present, but no one was close enough to see what was going on. I started to panic and then thought to myself that making a run for it would be impossible because of the little ones. So I had to carry them, but I knew that I could only carry one, and my sister wasn't strong enough to carry the other one. I tried to move past them, making it clear I wanted to leave, but I remember them just smiling and staring. I genuinely thought that they were going to drag us and take us away in their boat. I was ready to fight them off or offer myself up to save my siblings, when by some odd miracle, a family of tourists with kids appeared from the top of the dune, walking towards us. I picked my little sister up while my other sister saw them too and immediately started to shout towards them. I told my brother to run while waving and shouting. It must have taken them by surprise because when they turned their head and then saw the family approaching, they walked back towards their boats and then took off. We walked towards the family and the mother had sensed from afar that something looked a bit suspicious, and she offered to bring us back to our parents. I told them what had happened and they rightfully freaked out, but they said we reacted well. Even though I was a bit shaken up, we nevertheless went on to enjoy the rest of our vacation. The strangers were thankfully never seen ever again. Even if I'm still not 100% sure that they weren't just offering us some candy, I'm just glad I never found out. To this day, whenever I think about it, it still gives me the creeps. My family has a cabin in a tiny 150 resident hamlet in BC, and it's been a long-running tradition for everyone to stay in it all summer every year. Because we're there all the time, we generally know all of the locals, minus the few people who rent other cabins from the owners. One particular year when I was freshly 18 years old, I was out there with all of my favorite cousins. Since I was older, I normally took on the role of looking out for all of the younger ones, especially the girls. After a late breakfast, we headed down to the beach, which was unusually crowded, since the hamlet was currently celebrating its town days, so there were hundreds of people from neighboring towns flocking in to party. At the time, most of the family went fishing, so I was there with just 3 of the girls. Brooke was the second oldest to me, being 12, then Emma, who was 11, and Ray, who was 8. We sunbathed for a bit and made some sandcastles, and finally headed into the water to cool off. I'm kind of a wimp, so I took my sweet time getting into the water after them. I was about up to my butt when a guy walked up to me and started talking to me. He then introduced himself as Shane, and he said that he loved my tattoos and he wanted to say something while we were on the beach, but he couldn't build up the courage until now. I then thanked him and we made some small talk. I found out that he was only a couple years older than me, and his family also has a cabin in town that they visit every summer. Strange. I spent the last 18 years of my life spending all 2.5 months of summer here, and I definitely didn't recognize him at all. I brushed it off. Maybe I had seen him and he'd just hit a crazy face-altering growth spurt that some of my cousins had gone through. We continued talking and I couldn't help but notice that I got a really off vibe from him. Eventually my cousins came over to see what was going on and he introduced himself. All 5 of us ended up spending a couple of hours just hanging out on the dock, chatting or playing Dock Wars where everyone would fight to push each other off. I knew my grandparents would be starting dinner really soon, so we said our goodbyes and I walked back to the cabin with the 3 girls. Later that evening, I was sitting on the deck with the other adults. We had heard a quad rolling down the front street, and Emma perked up saying, "Hey, it's Shane." I glanced up and noticed that he slowed his yellow quad to a crawl when he passed the front gate, then sped off again. I asked her if she was sure that it was him, and she insisted that it was. I immediately felt the iffy feeling I had about him intensify, because we never told or showed him which cabin was ours, so that meant that there were 2 explanations, both equally creepy. 1. He could have followed us back from the beach, which I know was entirely out of his way since he told me where his cabin was. And 2, he could have been cruising around trying to spot which one we were in. Regardless, mission accomplished. He now knew. The next day, the same 3 cousins wanted to hike to the rope swing, which was about 3 miles down the Trans-Canada Trail that ran directly behind the cabin. I, of course, volunteered to take them. It sounded fun. We exited onto the trail through the backyard, and just as we're reaching the old trestle bridge, we see a yellow quad coming towards us. We move out of the way and he stops in front of us, and I see that it's Shane yet again. The typical, "Hey, how's it going?" happened, and before I could stop her, Ray tells him that we're going to the rope swing. I didn't want him to tag along after he went out of his way to find our cabin last night. Thankfully, he said he was heading into the bigger town just now, so we quickly parted ways. 20 minutes later, we're nearing the halfway mark of our journey. For probably the 30th time that day, we hear a quad coming up behind to pass us, so we move over. As soon as he passes, it's Shane on his yellow quad. Awesome. I guess he decided to join us after all. I'm not a confrontational person, so I just smile and wave and be polite. He responds by intentionally spinning his tires to spray us with the loose gravel and dirt, then speeds off. What a jerk. My bad feeling about him shot way up, so we turned around and decided to just go to the beach instead. At this point, Brooke told me she didn't like him and he gave her the creeps, while Ray and Emma chimed in with, "Yeah, he's really weird." I'm glad they already knew to listen to their instincts. The next few days were uneventful. We only saw Shane in passing on his quad, but I no longer waved at him after he pulled that stunt with the gravel. The 3 girls would always alert me and each other if they ever saw him, which I was thankful for because he started acting a little crazy when he passed us. He would always slow down and then crawl past us just close enough to almost run over our feet, then speed off while giving us the finger. Keep in mind, I was never rude to him, not once. Everything seemed really cool the one time we hung out, and I kept on my nicest face despite being uneasy about his presence. Yet, he seemingly had some kind of vendetta against me. Maybe I accidentally let on that I didn't want him to join us at the rope swing. I'll never know. About a week later, I was sitting on the deck reading when a group of the kids wanted to go to the General Dollar store for candy. I decided to opt out this time. My book was getting really good. So my uncle took all 7 of them to get the snacks, and I jokingly said, "Watch out for yellow quads." 15 minutes later, I hear the kids yelling with the distinct voice of my uncle, and they run up the driveway saying, "Shane tried to run us over." What the heck? What? I ask what the heck happened, and my uncle tells me that while they were leaving the store, he had spotted the familiar kids and apparently made a beeline for all of them. My uncle had stood between the quad and the group, and Shane had turned away at the last second, only missing them by inches. Immediately, all of the adults were in a rage, asking who this guy was and why he'd do that. The 4 of us gave the lowdown on him, and they told us to avoid him. No duh. We talked about reporting it since we were pretty sure he could get in trouble for all of this, but we ultimately decided not to for a couple of reasons. 1. Other than his first name, I had absolutely zero information about him. And 2. In a small hamlet 1 hour away from the nearest town with emergency services, cops were very, very few and far between. My grandpa said it was unlikely they'd even consider it worth their time, so we just decided to drop it. The rest of the trip was great. No one saw Shane again for the remaining days. I thought that the weirdness was finally over, but unfortunately, I was wrong. Because of circumstances out of my control, I wasn't able to go back to the cabin the following year. The following September, we had a big family dinner, which was the first time I got to see some of my cousins in a year. Partway through the night, Emma and Brooke run up to me and they say that they saw Shane a lot again that summer. My stomach dropped and I asked them if he kept up to his usual antics. Unfortunately, he had. Since I wasn't there, I guess he switched his main focus to Brooke. Thankfully, they were smart girls, so they kept avoiding him, even going on missions as they called it, communicating by walkie-talkies to make sure he wasn't around whenever they went anywhere. It honestly made me sad to hear that these kids had their fun, carefree summer tainted by having to watch out for a butthole on a yellow quad every day. I couldn't believe he was still bothering them. They said they had a couple of more close calls of him speeding towards them, but he never got more than a foot away before turning back around. I asked their parents if it was true, and they were just as uneasy as me, saying he would prowl back and forth in front of the cabin in the evenings to the point to where they had to tell him to screw off. I've been back for summer getaways on and off since then, but I haven't had any more encounters with Shane. I haven't even seen the familiar yellow quad, which makes me think that he hasn't been back at all. Brooke, Emma, and Ray continue to make little jokes here and there like, "Don't let Shane get you," whenever people leave the cabin. But besides that, the whole ordeal has mostly been forgotten about. As much as I hate the fact that those innocent little girls got caught up in it, I also know it's a great lesson to trust your intuition about people and to be very wary of strangers, especially the ones that follow you home and try to run you over. So Shane, if you end up seeing me at the beach again, do me a favor and stay the heck away from me and my family. Please, don't ever come near us again. I'm from the UK and our summer vacations last about 6 weeks. When I was around 14 or 15 years old, my younger brother who was 13 and my older sister who was 29 at the time decided to break up our vacation by taking us to a log cabin in Scotland for about a week. She knew there wasn't much to do around town, but she was always a great big sister, always looking out for my brother and I. My parents were happy for her to take us and we were happy to go. My sister told us both we could each invite one friend of ours. For my brother, this was easy as he had one best friend. But for me, it was very difficult as I had 5 friends to choose from. I basically ended up leaving it too late to decide who I wanted to bring, and all my friends didn't have enough notice to come. I was pretty bummed out about it, but my sister told me that when my brother was off with his friend, we would just have some sister time together. I love my sister very much, so this was ideal for me. We'd been in the cabin for 2 nights, and both nights we had ordered takeout and stayed in to watch TV and played board games. On our 3rd night, my brother and his friend took over the TV to play games, so my sister asked me if I wanted to go to the pub that was on the site. Aside from hundreds of cabins, there was a restaurant, pizza takeout, fish and chip takeout, tons of different shops, and also a pub/disco. I jumped at the chance to go. As I mentioned earlier, I'm from the UK, and here anyone 18 can go into a pub/bar as long as you're not drinking alcohol. So I wasn't sneaking in or anything. There were kids as young as 2 to 3 there. We got inside and my sister told me to find a seat and she'd get us a drink. She ordered me a lemonade and herself a vodka and lemonade. While I was waiting for her to come back, I couldn't have been sitting more than 3 minutes at the most. This guy, who looked to be about 30 to 35, came over to speak to me. He was collecting glasses, so he obviously worked there. He said hi and he told me I looked very pretty tonight. Me being extremely naive, I smiled and thanked him. I didn't think this was strange for a second, so when my sister got back with our drinks, I didn't think anything of it. He came round again and he seemed to be lingering around our table. My sister hadn't noticed and again, I didn't really think much of it. After a few minutes, my sister got up to use the restroom and I was sat alone. He walked straight over to me and started up a conversation about how I liked the cabin site and how long I was here for. He never once took his eyes off my chest. I was a very well-developed 15-year-old. This made me really uncomfortable. I felt kind of scared, but I didn't know what to say to get him to stop. When he saw my sister coming back, he left. I told her what had happened and she looked angry. She told me he was a creep and if it happened again to tell her. About 20 minutes pass and he comes over again, talking to me and looking at my chest, but again, my sister is at the bar ordering more drinks. When she comes back this time, he doesn't leave and he continues talking to me.
Yep.
My sister then asks him why he's there, and he replies, "I work here." My sister then asks why he's talking to me. As blanded as anything, he just answers, "Because she has great boobs." I tell him that I'm only 15 years old, and then he says, "Yeah, so what? I think you should remove that top and let me see." My sister screams at him to leave and calls him a pervert. He moves along and my sister gets up and she tells him he's going to speak to a manager. She's furious. Once again, as soon as she's gone, he comes back, picks up my drink that she just bought me, and pours half of it all down my top. "You're all wet now. You'll need to remove that top." I don't really know how else to respond other than that I'm only 15. What are you doing? Please stop. He looks at me in the eyes for the first time that whole night and then gives me the creepiest grin I've ever seen to this day. I'm frozen in fear and I can't move. He grabs a hold of my boobs in his hand and then plays with them in the busy bar in front of everyone. To this day, I can't understand how no one saw. It takes me a few seconds to realize what's happening. I'm numb. Once I realize what he's doing, I freak out. I haven't even kissed or held hands with the guy before, and here's this grown man filling my boobs. In a moment of panic, I just run. I don't pick up my phone or my purse. I don't even call for my sister who's at the bar shouting at a manager. I just run. I run out the door and I start making my way back to our cabin as fast as I can. Now, I'm not a runner at all. I'm anything but athletic, and I'm wearing heels, but I've never ran so fast in my life. I'm so scared I don't even realize that it's midnight, there's no lights on anywhere, and that I'm running in the complete opposite direction of our cabin. I look behind me for a second and the sky is running after me. I swear, I thought my heart had stopped. I start screaming at the top of my voice for someone to help me. I look back again and he's gaining on me very quickly. He then yells back,
"Shut up! Shut your mouth!"
I'm absolutely terrified. At this point, I'm just screaming random nonsense. I'm screaming for help, my sister's name, and for this guy to leave me alone. He's so close to me now. He's now laughing and telling me to stop shouting, that he only wants to talk to me. I turn around and he's so close it terrifies me. It's midnight, so a lot of the cabins are in complete darkness, but I manage to see the lights turn on in one of the cabins I'm approaching. I continue screaming for help and the door opens. A man about the same age as the one who's following me steps outside and looks confused. He sees me sobbing and asks if I'm okay. I turn around and the pervert following me is now running away. I'm so scared I can barely speak to the guy. He asks me what happened and I tell him I was being chased by a guy. He wakes up his girlfriend and he waits with me while he goes outside to have a look around. He comes back a few minutes later and he tells me there's no one there, but he'll walk me to my cabin. When we finally reach the cabin, my sister is outside walking around looking for me. I run to her and I tell her everything that happened. She thanks the guy for helping me and she calls reception from our cabin. They tell her that management would sort it out in the morning, as all bar staff had just finished their shift. We never waited to hear what happened. The very next morning we packed our things and then left. I never knew what came of it. I can only assume what he would have done if he had caught me. Thank God that didn't happen. So, a long time ago, I had a falling out with one of my friends who liked to cyber harass people she didn't like. Because I knew this, I took precautions on all of my social medias and added the two-step verification where it would send codes to your cell phone if someone tried to log in or change your password. Seems like a safe step, right? I never really thought about it any further until a few days ago. I get an SMS text from a random number that addressed me by my full first name. It freaked me out a little because the spelling of my first name is pretty uncommon from where I'm from. No big deal. Maybe it's just an old friend who changed phones. I gave the classic, "Who dis?" back at them, to which I received an even stranger text back. "Oh my goodness, it's you. Are you 18? I have something I want to cash app you." Well, that's weird, I thought to myself. Probably just some scam to hack my Cash App. I said again, "Who is this?" I never received a text back from that number. No less than 5 minutes later, I get 3 calls and 2 spam voicemails from different and unrecognized phone numbers. Then I get a text telling me to pick up the phone and saying my name. Now, that's pretty alarming. I immediately took screenshots and I had my boyfriend call from his phone, but no luck. I blocked the number and I hoped that was it. Maybe about 30 minutes later, I get 5 phone calls from a new number and a new, even more alarming set of texts.
"I'm a 40-year-old man and I'm in love with you. I will keep trying to reach you until you respond. I won't stop."
I immediately blocked the number and then called my parents. Then within about 2 minutes, he made a new number and texted me again.
"Wow, I just want to talk to you for 5 minutes. I'll even pay you, but after that, consider me gone."
Again, I just blocked him. I alerted my boss, then the text stopped. After work, I filed a police report and bought a baseball bat. My first instinct was that it was a guy I recently worked with who had been recently fired for harassment. One of my friends slash coworkers who is good with the tech staff changed his phone number and texted the number pretending to be me or Burner to get some more information out of him. It was a bit of a long conversation, so I'll sum it up by saying that this guy basically wanted to talk to me on the phone while he masturbated. He called me 26 times and got no answer, so he eventually stopped trying. We assumed that was the end of it. The next morning, I get a text from a new number yet again. He was claiming to be one of my friend's fathers. I started to freak out. Both my parents and my boyfriend were at work, so he sent his mom over to calm me down and stay with me while I was alone in my apartment. He called my phone and she answered it, and all he said in this super creepy raspy voice is,
Please.
and then abruptly hung up. I was having a full-blown panic attack at this point. We called the police department and they had an officer come out to update my report. She was still texting the guy while the cop was there. Once she told him law enforcement had been contacted, his whole story completely changed. He said that he doesn't know me or anything about me. He doesn't even live near me and means no physical harm. He's just a lonely guy who got my phone number from Facebook and decided to harass me. I might remember this wrong, but I could have sworn I had my phone number set to private, but I know I still had it up there because of the two-step verification. I recently posted something on Facebook Market, so I'm assuming that's where he found me. I have since deleted that account and changed my phone number, and nothing else has happened. Posting this here is more or less a warning to anyone who has that two-step verification set up. Please double check and make sure that you have the most private settings as possible for everything. I'm not even going to set up all that stuff with my new phone number. I'm not going to risk giving it out anywhere online. This started towards the end of my 8th grade year. Basically, my friend had this guy who was following her Instagram, and he would comment on all of her posts telling her how pretty she was. Now, that wasn't super weird, but we found it kind of creepy because this dude was obviously in his late 50s, and she was only 13. He also started messaging her every day. Not anything overly creepy, just mainly small talk at first. Eventually he finds my page and starts commenting on it, but I don't post pictures of myself online much, and basically all of it was just doodles and pictures of my dog. Now, this guy's account also mainly consisted of art, and most of it was actually pretty good, so I didn't really mind him commenting on my art at first. Eventually though, he also started messaging me and trying to talk to me as well. Now, I have pretty bad anxiety and I hate coming across as mean, so I wouldn't really respond with words unless he asked me a direct question. Mainly what I did was just send a heart or a smiley face. Stupid, I know. So this continues for a few weeks, and I learned that this guy can randomly blow up. I learned this because I had responded to a message from him asking my age, and I told him I was 13, and then I put my phone down because I had to do the dishes. When I came back to my phone, I had like 10 messages from him asking why I wasn't responding, and also telling me that he was joking. I was super confused at first at what he could have sent that would have made me mad. Basically, he had responded about how both me and my friend looked like we were 18. I found that to be creepy, but I didn't want to confront him about it, so I told him it was fine and that I was just doing my chores. The conversation moved on, and I made an excuse to stop messaging him for the day. One really creepy thing he did was when I posted a picture of my grandma's dog, which is a corgi, and put the caption of how much I love that dog. He liked that photo, and then within a day or so later, he sends me a picture of a corgi that he drew for me. I thanked him for it, and then he asked me for my address so he could send it to me. I absolutely refused, but he kept asking me, telling me that it was a gift and that he wanted me to have it. I had to send a message explaining that it was a family rule and that I wasn't allowed to tell him my address. After that, he dropped it. Eventually, after a bunch of little creepy things, my friend finally blocked him, and so he started ranting about it to me, saying how she shouldn't be creeped out by him and he was just trying to be nice, and that if she had a problem with anything he was saying, she should have just told him. He basically continued on like that for the next few days. He then pointed out how he was following her backup account, and how he was going to start talking to her on that one. I immediately told my friend all about this, and she blocked him on her backup as well. I eventually stopped talking to him as well, and I also blocked him. When I was around 13 to 14 years old, Twitter was the up-and-coming social network, and I had just made myself an account to see if it was all it was jacked up to be. I got a few followers, followed a few friends and celebs, etc. All was good until this guy started following me. I assumed it was all legit, just one of the people that you get linked to randomly when you first sign up. I don't follow him back because he's a few years older than me. In my profile pic at the time, I was clearly 13 or so, and my typical teenager tweets conveyed the same thing. I thought nothing more of it until a few days later, when he direct messaged me and told me to add him on MSN. He said that he liked my picture and thought I was very beautiful and all this other BS. Being the insecure girl that I was at that age, I added him the same day and we started chatting. He told me about how he's not really around 19 to 20 like I thought, but in fact he's in his 30s, has a wife and a child, and a full-time job in India where he lives. Now, things are starting to seem odd to me, but he said nothing harmful yet. We're just talking about hobbies and stuff. Then it starts to get even more strange. He starts asking me if I have a boyfriend, and I tell him no. He then asks if there's anyone I currently like. I say no, but that I do have a crush on one girl in my year at school. That catches his interest right away. He starts asking me all these things like,
What do you like about women's bodies?
and because I'm still oblivious to anything dodgy, I just say something like, I like their personalities more, and whatever, and so on. Then he says,
But what about the legs or the tits?
At this point I get really uncomfortable and say I guess so and that I have to go offline now because it's getting late. I don't go online for a few days, and when I get back online, I see that he's left roads of messages saying things like,
Are you there? I need to talk.
I message back asking what's so important, and he says that he got into a fight with his wife or something. Then about 5 minutes later, he says that he needs to go because if his wife knew he was talking to me, she'd kill him. After that, he quickly tells me how sexy I look in my new MSN pic and goes offline. I totally freaked out at this point, and I blocked him on MSN. The very next day, he starts tweeting at me asking me why I deleted him. Do I not like him anymore? He thinks that I'm so sexy and all this other creepy BS. After that, I blocked him on Twitter and created a new account just to be safe. Thinking back on it, I was so stupid even talking to him in the first place, as he was so much older than me, and he was obviously asking things that were so inappropriate for anyone to be asking, let alone an adult to a 13-year-old child. I never told anyone about it because it ended so quickly, but if I'd been more stupid and let it go on longer, it might have gotten so much worse. I just really hope he didn't pull this same crap on any other young girls. Just for some background, I'm a girl, early 20s, and this happened last year. I have a Twitter account which I kept private. I didn't have a whole lot of followers. I'd really only approve people who are friends of friends, etc., which I probably shouldn't have done. But anyway, I approved this one girl, Mary, to follow me, and I followed her back. Mary was really into Twitter. She'd tweet every 5 minutes, Foursquare her every location like she'd check into roads and streets, and she'd tweet every song she was listening to as well what she was currently watching on TV. It got annoying very quickly as my entire feed was comprised of Mary's activities. Because I didn't know her personally and hardly interacted her with any way, I unfollowed her. Shortly after that, I heard from friends that she was tweeting about me, making fun of my username, my description, etc. It was very strange, but I shrugged it off as her being butthurt that she lost a follower. A few days later, I had a friend send me a message asking about my new Twitter account, to which I then replied, what? Well, as it turns out, someone made a brand new Twitter account using my picture, a weird version of my name, and a twisted version of my username. They even used the same exact theme and background. On this account, they posted a lot of my personal information, from where I live to the name of my dog. I remember tweeting something like, "Thanks Mary for that parody account," and the crazy girl kept insisting that I made this account to frame her. I ended up having to email Twitter to get it taken down, which thankfully they did. I later heard that she was totally obsessed with me, and that she would always tweet about me if she saw me anywhere like concerts or at our uni. After that, I cleaned up all my accounts and deleted a lot of tweets that contained any personal info and blocked a lot of people. I really thought that because I didn't accept strange guys on my accounts that I'd be safe, but apparently girls can be crazy obsessive too. A little background on this guy. He's been messaging me for years from several different accounts, many of which I assume are him because he's been known to make many fake accounts before. The story I'm about to tell involves one of the fake accounts. A few weeks ago, I get a message from this one chick. Let's call her Kate. Well, Kate starts out with, "Hey, thanks for accepting my friend request, beautiful. Sorry if it's a little bit random, my other account got blocked because I posted a picture with cleavage." Ah, that makes sense. Yeah. I leave her on read. I was getting ready to go out of town because I was going to be visiting my boyfriend with his family, as he had just graduated from the Marines. About a week later, I get another message. "Hey, you're really sexy." At this rate, I remember the chick's other account. She pulls this same thing about a year ago, and I told her that I was happy in my relationship. She left me alone for a while. Now she's back, so I decided to try the happy relationship thing again. Thanks, my boyfriend tells me the same thing all the time. He's a very lucky man that I don't try and steal you. Okay, whatever. I decide to keep playing the whole I'm in a relationship screw off card. She asks me why I love him so much. Since he just graduated, I decided to send a picture of him and I together with him in his uniform to her. What makes him so amazing? That uniform. She then goes on to say something really gross. Something along the lines of, "I heard soldiers are really good in bed." And now that starts the sick part. She starts asking me questions about sex with him. Is he big? Is he kinky? What does he do to you? Does he ever put it in your throat? And questions like that. I'm trying to be as vague as possible in hopes that she'll get the hint, but she keeps asking. Eventually, as anticlimactic as it seems, she finally leaves me alone. Cue earlier today. I'm scrolling through Facebook and one of my friends posts a rant about someone messaging her. She said for everyone to be aware of an account that kept sending her explicit photos and asking her to meet up. She stated that she didn't think that the chick messaging her was actually the chick in the pictures, if she's even a chick at all. Well, it's the exact same account that was messaging me, with more or less the same text that she had sent me. I checked the comment section. There were dozens upon dozens of females that are posting about the same account messaging them with the same string of texts and photos. It eventually reaches this point where guys are commenting about wanting to find this chick and find out who she really is. I decided to post my own little part of the messages and stated that I think I know who it is. It turns out it's not a she, but it's a he. We figure out exactly who it is. Turns out, it's the guy that's been messaging me on and off for years. He's been messaging several girls with several different accounts, collecting all of the nudes that they send him, and then blackmails them and threatens to send their nudes to their families if they don't do what he tells them to. Luckily, I was underage, and I never sent photos like that to him or any of his other accounts, mainly because I was self-conscious. Holding my ground on not sending any nudes might have saved me in the long run here. This guy was crazy. He carved a pentagram into his arm because he was mad at his mother. He constantly posted about screwing girls, and he also bragged about being an extremely talented hacker. The moral of the story here is don't trust anyone you don't personally know. Who knows what he would have done to me or any of the other girls he tried to meet up with. Who knows what he'll try next. But please, everyone, please remember to stay safe. Please let this story come as a warning about strangers. I know we're all adults, but these are adult women as well as underage women that he'd been targeting. It's absolutely terrifying to think of what could have happened. Around first grade, I had became friends with this kid named Stan. He was a couple of years older than I was, but he had a sister that was around my age, who I was also friends with. I also had a wicked crush on their older brother, James. I lost contact with all three of them around middle school. Of course, when Facebook happened, I began getting in touch with the people I'd gone to school with. It was a moderately sized K through 8th grade school, So you were basically with the exact same group of kids through each grade. This makes for some pretty strong bonds, I believe. There was a lot of us who kept in contact after moving on to high school for a little while before drifting apart. Because of this, I was always really excited when I got back in touch with those people. However, not all of those connections have been positive. I got a friend request from Stan one day under a different name. The messages were the typical, "Hey, how's it going? What have you been up to?" etc. Then he started sending messages that were about my looks. They weren't obscene, but they did make me a bit uncomfortable. He started pushing to meet up. I can't really explain it, but I just had a really off feeling about him, so I was kind of avoiding making any kind of plans. He continued to be pushy about things, and finally I stopped responding to his messages altogether. I should also mention here that when I first accepted Stan's friend request, he literally went through every one of my pictures and liked all of them. That should have been my first clue, but I just let it go. Then I started getting messages from friends and even some family members asking me about him. Stan was going through and basically sending everyone friend requests. By this point I'm like, what the heck, this is weird. But things got really nuts when my cousin informed me that Stan had not only tried to friend her, he'd also sent her a message asking all sorts of questions about me, such as things that I liked or places I like to go. My cousin was concerned that he was sending those kinds of messages to other people as well, who might actually tell him what he wanted to know. I debated sending Stan a message telling him to back the crap off, but decided to just block him and change all of my Facebook settings to make it as private as I could. I also sent out a mass message to all of my friends and family, informing them of the whole situation, and to please kindly not give out any of my personal information. I had been friends with James, but I ended up blocking him as well, just to prevent Stan from getting access to anything. Things were quiet for about a week. Then, I started getting friend requests from random accounts. Some didn't have pictures and some had random images. They were accompanied by messages that made it clear they were all from Stan, full of skeevy comments about my looks and how he wanted to hook up. And that's putting it mildly. Literally every day I had an account that needed to be blocked. I contacted Facebook about the situation, but they didn't really offer any kind of help. It finally came to a stop when I threatened Stan with the police. My boyfriend at the time also threatened Stan. The peace only lasted for about a year. Then I got a friend request from a girl I'd gone to school with. We talked pretty frequently, both online and over the phone. She wanted us to hang out, so we talked about that for a little bit, but then she started bringing it up more frequently and persistently. I started getting that weird feeling again that something wasn't quite right. Then came the bombshell. Kelsey and Stan were dating. We'd all been in the same classes, so the fact that they knew each other wasn't that strange, but for them to be dating? I confronted Kelsey all about it, and then I blocked her because we'd been talking on the phone and they had my phone number. Of course, both began calling and texting crazy things non-stop. I finally had to get my number changed.
I'm here.
It's been over 10 years since all of this happened, and I haven't heard from Stan.
So I was
Kelsey
watching
started friending
YouTube.
recently with a different account, and
Ow.
the picture of Facebook shows that she's married to another man, and no
They had a
evidence of
pain in my
Stan.
foot.
I'm not taking any chances though. She's been blocked.
Ah.
This story covers a span of over a year or so of my life, so please bear with me. I am an uninteresting
Take a
man in my
bail.
late 20s with a stable job and a happy family. Being so,
Aw.
I never even entertained the thought that I might one day be the target of a stalker. So as a warning to everyone, here's my story. You don't have to be a typical pretty young lady to catch the eye of a stalker. I don't know if this makes sense, but I'm a habitual yet very casual Facebook user. I don't post a lot, but I do check my newsfeed quite often. One Saturday night, I was doing a quick round on Facebook before I went to bed when I received a friend request. I accepted it without hesitation. Just about every friend request I ever receive gets accepted because I don't ever post anything very personal. As I said, I have a very casual approach to social networking. I do a quick glance on the profile that had just friended me and saw that it was an obviously fake account. Not thinking too much about it, I put my computer away and fell asleep. The next day, I was having lunch at a friend's house, having completely forgotten about the friend request from the night before. My phone buzzed and I saw that I had gotten a message from a coworker of mine named Maya. Although Maya and I worked together and had a few mutual friends outside of work, we didn't really communicate much other than when it was about work. I checked it assuming it was work related. I guess looking back, you can say it was. To get to the gist of it, the Facebook account that had friended me had also friended Maya, and had bombarded her with insults and accusations of being a hoe and every other name in the book. The person took it a step further by messaging Maya's husband, saying that she was cheating on him with a coworker. Maya wanted to know if I knew who this person was because I was the only other person that accepted the friend request. I explained to her how I usually accept every request I ever get and had no idea who it was. I then proceeded to unfriend the profile in question. Maya explained to me that she had already had some suspicions on who it was, but just wanted to see if I could confirm it. She believed it was someone named Carrie. Let's rewind to a few weeks earlier. I had received a friend request from Carrie. It struck me as odd because although we worked at the same place, we had never met, never spoken, nor had we ever made eye contact or been within 20 feet of each other. We worked in different departments, but I walked past her every day because I had to walk to her department to get to our lounge. That was the furthest extent of our interactions. I only learned her name from when she friended me on Facebook, and I recognized her picture. I'm not really sure how she found out my name. Carrie also friended my wife's profile, and she subsequently began to shift through hundreds and years of my wife's posts and pictures, liking and commenting on several of them. She began interacting with my posts too, as though she knew us very well. At work though, I walked by like usual, and still no interaction. I found it pretty odd, but I didn't look too far into it. So back to the present. The mysterious Facebook account continued to harass Maya until she told her that she knew it was Carrie and was going to call the police. I thought that was the end of it, but boy, was I wrong. Over several weeks, I began getting more friend requests from multiple girls looking to hook up with me. Obviously, I knew they were all fake, and for the most part, I ignored them. I also began getting notifications from Google and Facebook accounts about suspicious activity on my profile. Most of the time, it warned me of failed login attempts. One I specifically remember said my Facebook account was actually logged in from somewhere unusual, and asked whether it was me. Well, it wasn't me. I should have been more concerned about it, but for some reason I really didn't care at the time. I was really stupid, and even after that, I didn't even bother to change my password. At the time, I viewed all of these happenings as random, isolated incidents. I had no valuable stuff on my account and didn't have any private secretive messages. What harm could they do, right? I mean, right? A few months pass when one day my wife gets a message from Carrie stating that she had bought a high-end video camera and was looking to start some amateur filming. She wanted to know if we would help her by letting her film our family for a day. Remembering what Maya had said months ago, I was pretty reluctant but wanted to give Carrie the benefit of the doubt. So we agreed to tell her that we'd schedule a time for her whenever we weren't busy, and left it at that. Once again, I have yet to actually meet Carrie. More weeks pass by and we completely forget about scheduling the film shoot, when then Carrie messages me about it. I turn her down and things got really weird. She had sent me several GIFs of stick figures doing some questionable positions. I didn't respond, so she asked, "Funny, isn't it?" I immediately texted my wife to log into my Facebook profile to observe the messages. Not wanting to be rude, I agreed with Carrie as the humor in the GIF she sent and carried on the conversation. She then proceeded to send me old photos from my abandoned MySpace account that I had completely forgotten about. This was around the time when MySpace had been revamped and people lost a lot of cherished memories. Somehow she dug up mine and decided to share them with me. This was really creepy to me. Things then escalated pretty quickly from there. She began talking about her body and how she wasn't attractive, trying to bait me into complimenting her looks. She wasn't beautiful by any means, but she was a decently attractive person. I didn't bite though. Then she hit me with something out of the blue. She had asked me about my private, suggesting that it was probably really big. I decided that was enough and completely stopped responding. Of course, my wife was reading this the whole time, and we were texting back and forth about how funny and weird this whole thing was. I continued to go to work, and still awkwardly never actually met her. I definitely didn't want to strike up any conversations after that. Carrie messaged me one final time asking for a favor. Maya had blocked her profile, and Carrie suspected that Maya was saying bad stuff about her, so she wanted me to check her profile to confirm.
Nope.
I told her that I wasn't going to stalk Maya for her, and that was that. Just between us though, I did check, and no, Maya couldn't care less to waste her time talking about Carrie. Around this time, my wife got a text from an unknown number. The person knew her name but was trying to remain anonymous and was trying to flirt with her. We were with a bunch of friends at the time, and we all thought it'd be funny if we all text flirted with this person at the same time to annoy them. Once again, I never thought to connect any of the incidents. Carrie eventually quit work, and I never saw her again, but I continued to get suspicious activity and friend requests that I stupidly continued to write off. I had all but forgotten about Carrie. Then, I'd say over a year later, I get a bomb from my wife. One of our good friends texted her saying that I was sending very inappropriate messages on Facebook. I had been really busy running errands all day and hadn't really checked my Facebook at the time. I found out that my password had been changed, and when I finally logged back on, all of my messages had been cleared. I had no idea the extent of what happened until I started hearing from more people that I was being very suggestive and nasty to them. The thing was, these weren't random women on my friends list that were targeted. These were women that were close to me. Good friends, my wife's sisters, and my friends' wives. These messages weren't holding back either. They went all out in gross detail about what I wanted to do to them. I felt completely violated and humiliated. I couldn't imagine how the women felt. My wife and I were really close to all of our families and friends, and every other week or so all of our friends would get together and drink, barbecue, watch movies, or sports and hang out. We'd have several families over and never had a problem. All of them said they understood what happened and they know that it wasn't me. Deep inside though, I could see that they felt it was possibly or potentially probably was indeed me. Over time, more and more of them stopped coming over to the point where my home started to feel empty. I confided in my wife of how I think that they think it was me, and she rebutted that I was just being paranoid. She argued that our friends were just very busy with their own lives, that they'd eventually come over when they were free again. I then learned that someone had created a Facebook account using my name and picture, and had continued harassing the same women. One of them posted a picture of the conversations with fake me on Facebook. She commented that it could really be me because apparently the mystery person had used the same words that I typically would. She also stated that this person knew my friends and family extensively. My heart instantly shattered after reading that. I quit checking my Facebook for the longest time, and I guess you could say that I kind of fell into a mild depression. I felt miserable. I told my wife that I wanted to disappear, and I actually strongly considered quitting my job of 7 years and moving away to start anew. I know now that I was being quite irrational, and thankfully my wife stayed strong for me through it all. I felt like I needed to defend my honor, and I started gathering alibis of times, people, and places that I was around during the time of all of those messages. My wife brutally told me that she couldn't believe that I was so weak enough to let a no-life idiot on Facebook put me down and make me feel that way. Which is true. I am and always have been a very mentally strong person. I always look for the best in a bad situation, but for some reason this affected me differently. I can't explain why, but I felt extreme shame and guilt for something I didn't even do. Without my wife's support knocking me back to reality, I don't know what would have happened. We advised all of our friends to just ignore the person, and eventually everything stopped. From time to time, I still get a random friend request, but I don't accept them anymore. I don't have any proof that this was all the work of Carrie. It just all happened during a time when she injected herself into my life, and eventually stopped after she left. My friends have started coming over again, but it hasn't felt the same ever since then. I don't know if it's them or just in my head. My wife and I came to the conclusion that Carrie reveled in the misery of others. After tormenting Maya, she then moved on and targeted me, trying to ruin my marriage and distance me from my friends, for no other reason than the fact that she enjoyed doing so. I'm pretty sure she hasn't stopped, and the only reason she left me alone is because she found a new victim to harass. What a terrible human being. So this literally happened this week, and it really creeps me out. Me and my family were on holiday, so we were going some clothes shopping in the mall. We had driven a fair amount of time, so we all decided to stop at the bathrooms. As per usual, the girls' toilets have a queue area, whereas the male toilets had no line. So me and my mom were waiting in line while my younger brother had gone in, finished, and gone outside to wait. My brother was outside all on his own for about 5 minutes. He's 15, so this is no problem at all. When we all come out, we all head off into another shop when we hear a man shouting at my brother very aggressively. We all turn around, and this man was poking my brother in the chest, getting up in his face and shouting things at him like,
You need to get that crap off your phone.
and
You're a sicko.
visibly my brother is confused, and with him being pretty much the sweetest guy you could ever meet, me and my mom knew that whatever this guy is accusing him of, he's gotta be wrong. Eventually, we get the guy to go calm down and explain what's going on. He starts spouting off about how
That game he is playing hurts me, and he is causing damage. He's a sicko.
this is where my mom stepped in to try to figure out what game it was and what he was doing. The guy couldn't tell us, which was red flag number 1. This is where the encounter began to go from creepy to downright unnerving. How come he can't tell us what game is hurting him or tell us anything about it? He then starts pulling at his trouser legs and starts showing us his legs, then pointing at them and saying,
This is what people like you have done to me. I try and show the doctors, but they send me to the psych every time.
The thing is, there was nothing wrong with this dude's legs at all. They were completely normal legs with no sign of harm or injury. Me and my mom kind of look at each other with an, "Are you seeing this crap too?" kind of look, as we both thought we were going to be seeing something major. He then starts to almost threaten us with,
I could have a hammer and I could attack you right now. In fact, I should because of what you did to me.
the hammer thing goes on for a while. He then gestures, hitting my brother across the face with a hammer for most of it. Eventually we managed to leave by just apologizing and walking away quickly. It seemed like going along with his accusations is what was making him stop harass us. It made me really sad because obviously this man needed help that he was not getting. This whole situation has left my brother slightly terrified. He no longer likes going to places without us nearby, but I can't really blame him. It was definitely a creepy experience. I lived and worked in Saudi Arabia for a few years back in the mid-90s. I had some pretty crazy experiences there, but this one was the most frightening. I was in a supermarket buying groceries and this man started following me around. I ignored him as he tried to talk to me. He kept asking me questions. There was something very menacing about how he was looking at me. He then got on his phone and was talking very intently, all the while watching me and following me around. This was a really big Walmart-sized store, so he was definitely making an effort, and this went on for about 20 minutes. I was very nervous at this point. I checked out with my items and started to leave. Just outside the door and into the corridor of smaller stores, there was a group of between 10 and 15 angry-seeming men who all crowded around me and started talking to me in Arabic. I played dumb and just kept my eyes down and kept mumbling about my husband and hoping they would think I wasn't a lone woman and just let me go. People were just walking past and working really hard not to look at this threatening group surrounding a woman. Just then, my amazing driver, a tiny little guy about 5'2", bowled through the group and grabbed my arm and started yelling at me angrily, and then at the men. He began yelling,
Wife, I have been waiting. You're so slow and stupid.
and then he yelled at the men,
What are you doing, you sinful creeps?
and then threatening to call the police. The men fell back and looked ashamed and confused. My driver then dragged me out of there talking loudly about how stupid and useless I was. I just went along with it and went with him and kept my head down as I tried not to drop my groceries from nerves. He got in the car and then turned around from the driver's seat to look at me. He then let out a big breath and he looked really terrified. He said he was so frightened for me and that he had seen men gathering in the car park and he knew something bad was going to go down. He said that they were talking about me. He told me that there had been some kidnappings within the last month, with the victims being found burned alive in tires outside of the city. My driver was a pretty crappy shooter, but he had gone wider than me as he told me all this, and he seemed like he was genuinely afraid. So I don't think he was exaggerating. After that, whenever I was out running errands, he always came with me and pretended to be my husband. He was an amazing person to stick his neck out for me like that, especially for a butthole like me. I decided to go shopping in a different city one day. I don't mind walking, so I walked from the train station to the mall. It was a short walk of about 10 minutes. As I had never been to that city, I used Google Maps to find the way. The shortest route was, though, a few alleys. I
It's
always
looking
tried to
really
stay aware
good.
of all of my surroundings, and I quickly saw two men that were walking about 5 meters
This is
behind
looking
me.
really good.
They spoke a language which I couldn't understand.
No, you're welcome.
I still didn't think too much of it, as it was a bright day, and we were in a public place
I
near
know.
stores, and I was still quite close to the train station. As I continued on my way to the mall, the man kept walking behind me, and slowly started to get closer to me. They had followed me around for about 5 minutes now. They were just a few steps away from me once I had reached the alley. Instead of just walking on, I decided to enter the nearest store because I felt unsafe. The store was a board game store, which was pretty cool. I decided to stay in there for a while until the men were gone, but they didn't leave. They waited outside. I stayed in the store and pretended like I was looking at stuff, and after a few minutes, the men came inside. They looked at me and started talking to the guy who was working at the store. I froze but stayed right where I was. One of the guys pretended that he wanted to buy a special deck of cards, and the other one kept looking at me. They didn't buy anything, and they eventually left after what felt like an eternity. I waited a few more minutes, and the guy working at the store asked me if I was okay. I then told him that I felt like I was being followed by those strange men. I then left once I thought they were gone. I continued my walk to the mall and got into the store safely. I found some clothes, and then suddenly I spot one of the two men. He immediately reached for his phone when he saw me. I went into the fitting room to hide out. I stayed there for over half an hour until I had to go home. Nobody could come pick me up, so the journey home was quite scary. I never saw the men ever again. This happened to me last summer when I was walking home at around 4 a.m. It's not as scary as your typical scary story, but it was still creepy nonetheless, and I thought I'd share it. My city is considered kinda dangerous by people
Chihuahua.
from surrounding towns, but I've lived here my whole life and I never had much problems, even when I lived in the most dangerous area. This story, however, took place in the center of the city, which is considered very safe. A friend and I were out drinking after a birthday party, so I was pretty smashed. After a few beers, we eventually decided to go home. He lives in a totally different direction from me, so I had to walk home by myself. This is usually never a problem for me. I just put on my headphones and listen to some music while walking. As I'm walking beside a river toward the city mall, which is a big open concept building, I get passed by some guy that's staring at me quite creepily. I didn't think much of it. It's kind of a normal occurrence and it's usually harmless, so I decided to just let it go. I slow down a little bit to change the song, and when I look up, I see that he stopped walking completely. He's now a little further away from me and is quite obviously staring at me, waiting for me to get to the place that he's at. Now, I'm not the kind of girl to tolerate such behavior, and I usually always confront people like this. As it turns out, they usually get scared when confronted and usually just run away. Having this in mind, I take off my headphones, and when I reach and pass him, he starts walking right behind me and then starts speaking something to me. I stop and I tell him to leave me alone, that I know what he's up to and that I'm not interested. That really pisses him off. I continue walking and he walks right behind me. He starts yelling and cussing at me, saying things like,
Which one?
You think just because you have tits you're better than me? I don't give a crap about you. I hate people like you.
Now in my very pissed off state,
Um,
I just say something back to him a couple of times, which of course doesn't go well with him. But getting harassed like this really hits a nerve, and I just can't. I, however, start realizing that he's been getting closer, and there's literally nobody around me that would be able to help me if he decides to attack me or something. So, as I'm pissed off, I'm getting a bit concerned. As we reach the end of the mall, he's almost right behind me, still yelling some obscenities at me. At this point, I had had it. I decided to call a friend and quite loudly tell her that some creep is following me around and threatening me through the mall. And I asked her to stay on the phone with me so if something happens, someone would at least be aware. He was getting even pissier after I got on the phone, as he was mocking me for it. Apparently he also got scared though,
For the
Just a moment
first
after that,
time
he
and
disappeared. I
forever,
guess he just took a turn somewhere and
my
continued walking
pants
in another
flew
direction,
across the
but he was no
room.
longer yelling nor walking behind me. I stopped to take a breath and calm myself down. I eventually exit
Right,
the
I made
mall
up
and I
on the
reach a
song.
street where I see a cop car parked. I try to report this to the cop sitting outside, but the male cop just told me to call 911 as this wasn't his problem. Then he went inside in a nearby casino. The girl cop just repeated what he said and basically just told me to go home. There's nothing they can do. Eventually I did, and I've never seen that guy again. Today, after my 4-year-old's basketball game, I picked up his younger sister so they could spend some time together. She's 2. We planned to go to Chuck E. Cheese with my friend and her son. We only had about an hour. I decided to take them to the mall. My son needed new shoes and I had a return to make, and the mall has some little quarter rides to entertain them. To understand this story, it's kind of important to know the layout of the mall. The mall is basically shaped like a cross. The 4 exits are at the end of the lines in the cross, and in the middle of the cross there are food stands and random booths. It's also really important to understand that when you're walking with a 2-year-old and 4-year-old, you are walking slow. Like, really slow. Like a walk that usually only takes 1 minute turns into 5. Okay, so we park and we enter the mall. We go into the shoe store first and get my son some shoes. After that, we head towards Victoria's Secret to make my return.
Where?
Victoria's Secret is at a different line in the cross shape, so we have to pass through the middle area and then turn left. As we're walking, I notice this guy that's in front of us, and he keeps staring back and looking at us. Like, a lot. He's pretty far ahead of us, but also slowing down to shorten the distance between us. Of course, he turns into the direction that we have to go, but I try to slow down. We finally get to Victoria's Secret, and he's still a ways ahead of us, but just staring at us as he walks. At this point, I was pissed. I decided I was going to call him out on his crap, and maybe he'll stop. As we're walking in, he's staring at me. I make direct eye contact with him and then wave and say, hello, can I help you? I see you staring. I'm not dumb. Cut the crap. He just looks away and keeps walking. Well, I thought that was the end of it. Anyways, we spend a good 25 to 30 minutes in Victoria's Secret. I'm no longer thinking of the weird guy. After that, it's time to leave, so we walk back out the same way we came in, meaning once again we have to walk through the middle and then now turn right and walk down to the exit. As soon as we walk out of Victoria's Secret, the guy is standing maybe 20 feet in front of us. He's literally standing behind a pole and staring at us, like he was just waiting for us to leave. As soon as he sees us, he begins walking in the middle. So once again, he's in front of us. He lingers in the middle area, and we turn right. He then turns right and walks right past us and into the shoe store that we had already gone into. We then reach the shoe store, and he's now staring at us from within, like he's waiting for us to pass. Then he walks out and walks away from us, back to the middle, but is still staring. When he gets to the middle, he then turns around, kind of like a U-turn, and is now walking behind us. He's doing this slowly, like really slowly, because we're already walking slow. At this point, I've had enough. I don't know yet. Duck into a store, and I then tell the guy working there to call security. I need an escort to my car. I'm not really sure if he saw us go into the store, because about 10 seconds later, I just see him walking by the store looking around. I assume after that, he then walked outside since it was by the exit. Luckily, everything was fine. I'm not too sure what would have happened or if anything would have happened at all, but better safe than sorry. This was not a normal coincidence. This was straight up being stared down and stalked while in the mall. I don't know if it was about me or about the children, or maybe he wouldn't have done anything at all. But either way, I'm not taking the risk. But something interesting I want to add. Oftentimes, these stories are people, mostly girls or women who are on the small size. I even saw a comment the other day pointing out how these people tend to be targeted more. Well, I'm 5'9" and 160 pounds. I thought that maybe that was why I've never been targeted before, and that's why I've been able to avoid these types of encounters. I find it pretty interesting that this experience occurred when I had my hands full with 2 little kids. It seems like these type of people like to target those who are more vulnerable. So this happened about 5 years ago while I was 9 months pregnant. I was out Christmas shopping out the mall with my then 7 and 15-year-old daughters on Saturday night. I'd like to add that this was in a very safe city. There was an Applebee's connected to the mall, and we ended our shopping pretty late. The mall stores were starting to close, so I took my kids to the connected Applebee's for a late night dinner. We finished up eating at about 10 p.m. We left the Applebee's entrance into the practically deserted parking lot with all of our shopping bags in tow. As we got to the car, I was in the middle of maneuvering the shopping bags on my arms to find my keys, when a 50-ish-year-old crusty-looking guy starts walking up from somewhere in the parking lot, with shaggy gray/white hair and a faded flannel shirt and old jeans. I noticed him briskly approaching when he was about 40 feet away, and then he said,
This is a stick-up. Give me all of your money.
My blood ran cold, and I just stared at him owlishly, and then shakingly said, What? He then said he was kidding, and then came up and stood right next to my daughters, who were standing on the other side of the car and waiting for me to unlock it to let them in. He then started making small talk with me and my girls. He begins asking things like, are they good girls, how old they were, if we got all our Christmas shopping done, and what kind of things did we get. He didn't really seem drunk, high, slow, or mentally challenged at all. He was very coherent and seemed of sound mind. Mind you, I was a heavily pregnant woman along with my 2 daughters in a mostly deserted parking lot at 10 o'clock at night, who was being approached by a stranger who came and stood right next to my kids on the other side of the car just shooting the breeze, talking to me and my kids with his hands in his pockets and occasionally looking over his shoulder. I didn't want to aggravate him, so I was politely conversing with him and trying to look calm and nonchalant, while trying to disguise my frantic hands digging inside my giant purse for my keys. This exchange went on for a couple of minutes while he periodically kept looking over his shoulder. I was silently panicking, and I was trying to politely keep the situation from escalating by calmly and nonchalantly talking to him, while also trying in vain to find my dang keys and get the crap out of here. They were hiding in my purse good. I felt at any moment he was going to pull something on me or try and rob me, and my kids were right next to him, away from their mother on the other side of the car. And I couldn't find my freaking car keys to get my kids into the safety of the car. He kept trying to engage them in conversation, and I could see that my oldest daughter was a little weirded out. Kids often tend to not recognize potential danger when they're with their parents, since they see us as their protectors. And being that he was only talking and acting friendly, I was doing my best to stay calm. They were completely oblivious to this alarming situation that we were all in. And being 9 months pregnant, I was no match for this grown man, especially if he was hiding a weapon on him. While still desperately digging for my keys, I tried to politely give him hints that the conversation was over by saying things like, it was nice chatting with you, but I gotta get these kids to bed, and it was nice meeting you, and then telling my girls to also say that it was nice meeting him. My polite attempts to get this guy to leave wasn't working because he kept sidestepping my attempts, asking my kids what their favorite school subjects are, and how nice young ladies they are, all while I was struggling with the shopping bags and digging in my giant cluttered purse for my keys. My outgoing 7-year-old was totally oblivious to how not okay this whole situation was, because he was being friendly, and because of the whole, I'm with my mom, so I'm safe, child mentality. So she started to talk about what she had picked out for her dad for Christmas, and then she started enthusiastically talking about kid stuff and asking him if he knew what Minecraft was. Basically keeping this creep from leaving us alone and keeping him engaged in the conversation. They weren't catching on that I was becoming really desperate to get them the crap out of there. Then, I suddenly felt this sinking feeling of dread when I realized that I may have lost my keys in the mall and that we were now stuck outside with this strange man who kept looking over his shoulders and was showing no signs of walking away. I was thinking that he was waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. All he had to do was grab one of my girls and threaten their life, knowing it would make me do whatever he wanted as long as he wouldn't hurt them. I started to feel my adrenaline start to spike, and my heart and stomach started doing flip-flops, and I felt like any moment crap was going to go down, as the gravity of realizing that there were no other people or witnesses around, and we were totally alone with him, and right at that moment, the odds were stacked against us, and this was his chance. Then he all of a sudden was like,
Okay, well, it was nice chatting with you. See you later.
and walked off in the same direction as to which he came. It wasn't until then I found my car keys and unlocked the car. I then told my kids to get in the car as fast as they can. I then got in too. I locked the doors and started the car and drove the heck out of there. My 15-year-old lightheartedly and jokingly said, "Okay, that was weird," and then laughed. I was so overwhelmed with relief, and then I was confused over what just happened. I thought to myself, why the heck would a guy of seemingly sound mind think it was totally acceptable to go out of his way to approach a woman and her kids in a deserted parking lot late at night just to chit-chat? But being that nothing bad actually happened, I just brushed it off and I joked about it too. When we finally got home, my husband greeted us and asked how shopping went. I said that it went well, and my 15-year-old told him what happened in the parking lot and how weird it was and was just kinda joking about it. I started joking too, saying how I was mentally having a panic attack while trying to look calm. I began telling my husband how I was attempting to inconspicuously rummage through my purse to find the car keys. My husband went completely white. The look of his face was one of pure alarm. I then assured him that, albeit creepy, the guy was just talking and eventually left all on his own. Now, my father-in-law is a retired deputy, and my husband went through police training after graduating high school. And being that the knowledge he gained from that, plus growing up with a cop for a dad, I found out why my husband looked absolutely creeped out when I told him the details. What my husband then told me completely rattled me to the bone. My husband then told me that he was 100% sure that the reason that the guy was hanging around us and chit-chatting was because he was waiting for me to unlock my car. And the reason why he was standing next to our kids was because once I unlocked the car and the kids started to get inside, he was most likely going to force himself in the car with the kids and hold a knife or gun to them to gain leverage on me, then to force me to cooperate knowing that I wouldn't abandon my kids, which would force me to get in the car with them and then do whatever he wanted me to do, which most likely would be to drive to a remote location to do God knows what. And being that he wasn't wearing a mask, that suggests that his intentions were to also leave no witnesses to identify him. I then remembered that he was positioned by the backseat passenger door where my 7-year-old was standing by waiting to get in. My husband then told me that the most likely reason why the guy ended up leaving was because it took me too long to find my keys, and the longer it took, the more anxious and spooked it made him. And that whole time, I was desperate to find my car keys, which through some sort of divine intervention, stayed hidden in my purse, thus saving us from potentially being abducted. When I was about 6 years old, I remember Easter was rolling around, and I wanted a chocolate bunny. I asked my dad to take me to Rite Aid to get me one. He said he was busy, so I told him I'd just walk and get one myself. He said that was fine because, honestly, he was just a crappy parent. So I embark on the 1.5 to 2 mile walk through the rural Louisiana to the store. Houses are pretty sparse. I come up to a 4-way intersection and I can see the store in the distance. As I approach the 4-way, I see a small green truck, which I think was a Ford Ranger. There's 2 men in it. The one in the passenger seat is blatantly pointing at me repeatedly, and they're both...
Dear
I was about to cross
Digby.
through a parking lot on the right side of this intersection when I see this truck whip into it and park between the 2 cars. I then see the passenger jump out of the truck and crouch down with his hands out, now trying to hide between their truck and the vehicle that they park next to. Thankfully, an older woman that used to babysit me when I stayed with my mom filled my young head with a bunch of stranger danger propaganda. I immediately flip the crap out, bypass the parking lot, and break out into a dead sprint into the Rite Aid. Once inside, I began to pace around the store a little bit and try to calm down. I took a glance through the glass door and see the freaking truck with those 2 guys in it parked right in front of the Rite Aid. At this point, I knew beyond all doubt what was going on. I asked the lady at the cash register if I could use the store's phone to call my dad. She told me that the phone could only be used to call 1-800 numbers for some odd reason. I burst into tears and start getting hysterical, and the manager comes to the front and lets me use his cell phone. I get in touch with my dad, who sent my brothers to pick me up. By the time they got there, the green truck had left. Not one person freaking believed me. They nonchalantly just said, "So what happened? Something about a kidnapping?" I told them all what happened, and literally, everyone just brushed it off, and it was never talked about ever again. That crap still makes me furious to this day. I wonder what the heck those scumbags were planning. The thing that really troubles me the most is they could have gotten some other kid on some other day, and done God knows what to them. So to those wannabe kidnappers in the green truck, thank you for ruining my day and my mission to get a chocolate bunny. I really hope I never see you guys ever again. So this happened around a week ago at the same time, 2 a.m. Just a bit of background. I live in the UK and go to uni. I live in a fairly typical student house. Anyways, it's the Easter holidays here and we get 2 weeks off.
Yep.
There's usually about 7 of us in the house,
You okay?
but everyone's gone home. I don't have a lot of family and I have a ridiculous amount of work to do, so I decided to stay here for Easter. Now, I don't care what people think when I say this, but I hate being alone. Every little noise at night still freaks me out, and I'm 22 years old. Anyways, yesterday I set up camp in the living room, doing some work with headphones in. There's a door from the living room that leads to the backyard, with another door leading to a small alley.
Okay.
I decide to go out for a smoke down the alley. I get back, but do you know when you have that "something's not right here" moment? Well, that's what I felt. I was thinking how paranoid I was. I got a drink, then I definitely heard a noise. I go to get
And I forget the question. I'm here. What did what did the sock say to the other sock? I feel long and tired. What did the why did Mickey Mouse make a weird face? Because Minnie was out there shaking it. Just go and have a good day. And that too. Take care, everyone. Bye, everyone. Bye, hon.